I'm Summer Lee, activist and legislative candidate from Pennsylvania.
I'm Bob Bland, entrepreneur, fashion designer, and co-founder of the 5 Million Strong Women's March.
I'm Matt McDermott, Democratic pollster, communication strategist, the number cruncher behind the progressive takeover.
And I'm Tamika Mallory, one of the organizers of the Women's March on Washington, the worst nightmare of the Republican good old boys posse, and one of the leaders of the angry mob. Welcome to Manhattan Neighborhood Networks and Free Speech TV's America's Midterms, the Blue Wave. Home central for the latest on progressive races in the war to take back America. On tonight's show, Idaho, the home of potatoes, where the Good Old Boys Network is getting mashed up by a progressive woman who happens to be Native American, and a progressive who is a former corrections officer in what I like to call the prison industrial complex. They say she's got the keys to setting us free. So open up those gates, because here comes the Blue Wave. Welcome. Great show ahead. Let's roll. Matt, give us the latest. What's the good news? And are these Trumpers out of here? We need to hear that from you right now, Matt. What's the number?
So look, I don't want to sugarcoat it. This is going to be an incredibly close election. We continue to see Democrats up slightly in the House. But again, I think we need to recognize how many seats we need to win in the House and how many seats we need into the Senate to win back a majority in Congress. And it's going to be close. Voters across the aisle are energized, and I think what Democratic elected officials need to be doing over these next few weeks is drawing that contrast and reminding voters why they don't like Republican politicians. They have spent 2 years taking away health care from 20 million Americans. They have spent 2 years putting kids in cages, and voters are forgetting why they hated Republicans for 2 years. We have to be drawing that contrast.
And the deficit is now at an all-time high after they gave away huge tax breaks to millionaires.
To the rich.
So we're basically saying that we need to talk about the issues.
Right.
I feel like maybe sometimes we spend too much time focusing on Trump this, Trump that. You know, is that a good tactic? Is it working?
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's right. Republicans are very good at the anger machine. They're very good at fear-mongering and scaring voters about that external threat out there. Democrats, I think, are happy warriors. We like talking about policies. We like talking about issues. Summer, I know you do. I think we need to do a better job of drawing that contrast. It's not just that we want health care for all Americans, but on the flip side, Republicans are actively trying to take away health care from their constituents, and we need to remind voters of that contrast.
And it's just got to be clear. I think so.
Matt, we've heard about an angry mob of women being a potential deciding factor in this election. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we continue to see a huge gender gap in this election. In the latest NBC poll this week, women are voting for Democrats by 25 points. Men continue to support Republicans. So we will
when you
see.
say men, what men? Which men?
White men.
White men, right. Let's say white men. Which men? Right.
So this midterm will come down to turnout among women voters. And so I think what I would love to hear from you guys from the Women's March, what are women's organizations in this country doing to ensure that women voters turn out in those record numbers?
Well, we saw that there's over 5,000 indivisible groups that are still active that are all led by women. And even just yesterday, Jess King, who's a great candidate, a progressive candidate in Pennsylvania, turned out 20,000 people knocking doors, and that's in a very small district.
That's
I mean, I think what folks don't know is some folks think we had a march 2 years ago, and that every now and then we pop up with like different activities, but instead, Power to the Polls is a campaign that we launched in January of 2017, right? So our year anniversary, instead of us having another big march in Washington, D.C., we went to Nevada because we know right there in Nevada, there's a lot happening, and all in the surrounding areas. We went there to activate people, and people came out. Women have been on the ground in our network across the country under this Power to the Polls campaign.
And we've registered tens of thousands of people to vote.
And women have definitely been carrying it on. It hasn't stopped in 2016. I can say on the ground in my race, deciding factor. Women were out knocking on doors. They were leading organizations. They were leading the resistance. So I definitely think that we don't have to worry too much about women coming out. But we do still have to get everyone out.
Absolutely. And speaking of everyone, the other thing that we launched was a formerly incarcerated component to our Power to the Polls campaign, where we're bringing some of the white ladies and the formerly incarcerated community together to have conversations. There are people who are saying, listen, I don't have my voting rights, but you can vote for me. Let me tell you my issues. Represent my issues.
Undocumented folks as well. It's the same sort of thing.
That's right.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the message for Democrats over the next few weeks is, again, contrast, is we need to talk about why this election matters so much, why we haven't had accountability in Washington for 2 years, why we haven't had transparency out of Washington in the last 2 years, and the fact that that will only happen if Democrats win these races across the country. And then the second point I think we need to make is that you have to vote down ballot in this election.
Every issue,
vote. Every race.
Senator, as a down ballot candidate, why is it so important that voters vote down ballot?
Well, you know what? Because and I am the down ballot, candidate. But really, when we're knocking in very localized races, people know the person who is running down ballot. So you might not know your Senate candidate, or you might not know personally your governor, but you should personally know, your state legislative candidates, your state Senate candidates. So that's energy. Those are doors that we can get out. And if you're coming out for us down ballot, you're going to hit the same ticket for your up ballot vote.
And let me make this a federal issue, because as we get to 2020, these state legislative candidates will be redistricting our states and ensuring that Democrats have a seat at the table. If we don't have down ballot candidates who can represent Democratic interests.
And then also, I mean, we talk a lot about, what's going to happen with Roe v. Wade. With Kavanaugh at the Supreme Court right now. Our state legislatures are the place that we can now protect our rights.
The only way.
So we have to. It's the only place left now. If that falls.
That's right. That's right. Well, there's a lot of stuff to talk about. I mean, there's so many issues, and you kind of feel like you have to take them step by step. I mean, and the church that I'm a member of, they actually bring a ballot, what it looks like, in and explain to people like who's going to be on it and what you need to pay attention to, and folks are not doing that. We're not educating people fully on what it means to be an educated voter.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what's at stake? Sometimes people can't or don't vote because they can't relate to these issues. And if no one is talking, there are some states where there might not even be a voter guide.
And I think we need to recognize too that issues will actually be on the ballot this year. We'll be talking to a gubernatorial candidate in Idaho today, where Medicaid expansion's on the ballot. In Florida, voter enfranchisement is on the ballot for
1.7
million people.
So even if you're going out there and voting for the candidate, you have to be voting for those issues too, because that is one of the only ways today in a Republican government where we can get progressive issues to those voters.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, that's great. Like I said, there are a lot of issues, and we've got to figure out how to cover them all. Coming up, a candidate who is moving from the big house to the White House.
We can provide health care as a human right, and we can and should treat all people with equal respect and dignity. I'm Lisa Ring, and I'm fighting for the people of Georgia's 1st District.
This particular guest knows something about mass incarceration because she used to be a corrections officer. And she runs an organization to stop the revolving door for formerly incarcerated people. From Georgia to Washington, please welcome Lisa Ring.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Hi, Lisa. Thank you so much for being with us.
Lisa, it's great to have you with us today. I mean, I think I need to ask right off the bat, we have all heard stories for weeks now about voter suppression in Georgia and actions happening to prevent voters from their democratic right to make their voice heard in this election. Talk to me a little bit about how you're seeing that evolve in your district and what your campaign is doing to make sure every voter has the right to vote this election.
Well, this is something that's not new to Georgia. We have a Secretary of State who's also running for governor. So there's definitely a conflict of interest there. This particular Secretary of State has a history of purging our voter rolls and making it more difficult for people to register to vote and for their votes to be counted. We're doing everything we can to work around the barriers that are put there. What we really need to do is replace everybody, though. We need a new Secretary of State. We need a new governor. We need a new Congress. We need people who are going to protect and expand the rights of voters. So when it comes to getting around these barriers, one thing we've been doing from the beginning is encouraging people to check their voter registration and make sure that they were registered to vote, if they were, and that their polling locations were known, that they weren't changed or shut down. Through that, many people did find that they were removed from the voter rolls and were able to re-register to vote in time before the deadline.
What do you see as steps that Congress can take after this election to make sure that this doesn't happen again, and what can be done federally to make sure that voters have that access to the polls?
The reason that we have a problem is because the Voting Rights Act was amended by the Supreme Court a few years ago. I believe it was 2013.
Yeah.
And what this did was it took away the protection that the state governments could not make changes to their voting laws unless they went through the federal government and had those changes approved first.
And Lisa, speaking of the Supreme Court, what does it mean for a Georgia Democrat to be pro-choice? And if Roe v. Wade comes before the Supreme Court again and is struck down, what would you do?
Being in Congress, if I was a representative in Congress, what I would be working for is legislation that protects a woman's right to choose. That is a very important issue. It is an important issue for women. And I think women's issues are being highlighted this election year. These issues are nothing new to Georgia. We only have one Planned Parenthood in Southeast Georgia. And our funding has been cut dramatically. Access to women's reproductive health has been cut dramatically throughout the state, and health care entirely. So we have a lot of battles ahead of us, and yes, this issue is very important.
Let me ask you really quickly on two things. One is, what is the racial demo of your area? And then second, how are you addressing gun control? I know that, obviously being someone who was in law enforcement, and so, for someone like me who looks at law enforcement as a partner, but not more important than grassroots organizations who are doing the work on the ground. I'd love to hear about, one, the makeup of your district, and then moreover, how you are dealing with gun control, understanding where we are in terms of that conversation across the country with conservatives.
The demographic makeup of the district is about 40% minorities and half women. African Americans make up about 30%. Throughout the state of Georgia, minorities are closing in on half of the population. So we have a very diverse population in this state and in this district. And it's my job to represent every single person in this district and to try to represent the diversity that we have. When it comes to issues having to do with gun control and protections, I do want to tell people that, first of all, we're not looking to take people's guns away. I am a former gun owner. My husband is a gun owner. He's in the infantry. That's not even what we're talking about here. We're not talking about the Second Amendment. What we're talking about is the number of gun violence incidents we have in our country. We have to do something, and we have to start with doing the research, allowing the CDC to have actual facts and statistics about where we need to go with this issue and how we can solve it.
Yeah, that would require, which is what the grassroots community that deals with violence has been pushing for, that violence would be classified as a public health crisis, which would then mean that the resources and the research would be done, and that the country would look at gun violence very different and really address it, sort of like how we're looking at the opioid crisis. Let me ask you this question. Are you running as a firm Democrat, or are you somehow trying to, keep that out of the dialogue just because of the types of folks who are in your district?
I'm going to be real blunt about this issue. I don't shy away from the fact that I'm a Democrat or that I'm a progressive. I'm the chair of the Bryan County Democratic Committee, and I'm the vice chair of the State Democratic Party Rural Caucus. And I was a Bernie Sanders delegate, and I was co-chair of the Sanders delegation for Georgia. What we have to move beyond is the labels and the divisiveness that is going on in this country, because we are getting in our own way. Democrats and progressives, we're engaged in a very real battle in this country for people's rights, for freedoms. We are facing a false message and a fascist type government in the future if we don't work together and stop fighting with one another.
So Lisa, you mentioned it. You mentioned the word fascism. Are we at the point now in our national discourse that we can just say that Trump is a fascist?
I certainly think that we are headed in that direction. We see every day these dangerous actions that are being taken, encouraging violence against press, our freedom of speech. It's a very scary situation.
Lisa, as a member of the House, would you support impeaching President Trump?
I don't want to say what I would do in the future, because I would have to have everything laid out for me, and we would have to have a very tight argument for proceeding. I don't want to do anything halfway through. Right. I don't want anything to be started and not be able to finish it properly. So I don't want to speculate on what I would do, but what I will say is that I will stand up for the people and against this dangerous direction that we're moving in. And that certainly means calling out our president and his administration and making sure that they are held accountable for everything they do.
So we have to wrap. Thank you so much for your time. I tell everyone, knock on those doors yourself. You know, volunteers cannot in any way replace people seeing your face and hearing your voice and your commitment. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Lisa.
Next, here comes the new governor. In Idaho, it's high noon, no horsing around. A progressive woman's farm country campaign ahead.
My commitment is to Idaho first and Idaho always. My name is Paulette Jordan. I'm running for governor.
Right now, Trump's disrespect knows no bounds. But I dare him to call our next guest Pocahontas. She's a Native American woman running for governor in Idaho. Pure progressive. She's only 38 and has a tribal family history going back generations, pushing back at special interests, big ranchers, and big oil, and standing up for all of us. Welcome to New York, Paulette Jordan.
Yes, thanks for having me. I'm very pleased to be here.
So let's cut right to it. You know, Trump calling Elizabeth Warren Pocahontas to me is very similar to when a Republican congressman called Obama tar baby. I mean, it's extremely disrespectful. How do you feel about it, and how is it playing out in your community?
It is extremely disparaging and extremely disrespectful, and I completely agree with the people. It's unfortunate that we have a president who is doing this in terms of smearing a population of people who are the First Nations of this land.
Yeah. Paulette, I want to ask you, on the ballot this year, other than the governor's race, is a proposition to expand Medicaid for Idaho citizens. I'd love to hear from you, because there are ballot initiatives on Medicaid expansion across the country, why expanding Medicaid is so important and why you've been talking about it so forcibly.
Yes, I've been a champion and advocate for years now. In fact, when it was first offered, when I first was elected, I refused health care paid by the taxpayers, because I felt that if there are going to be people in our state without access to health care, why should we as elected officials have access to health care? And in fact, we're still there today. We're still stuck in this position with nearly 100,000 people stuck in that Medicaid gap. And why we need that money, our resources that we're already paying to come back to Idaho, is many of our rural hospitals and rural clinics are in decline, but they're also just hanging by a thread. So we want to save our rural hospitals and clinics, and also ensure that those people who are caught in the Medicaid gap have access to health care insurance.
And what would you say, Paulette, are the other top issues for you when you're going out and reaching out to voters right now?
I'm born and raised Idaho, so I'm all about our traditional values and really about independence and freedom. So I also want to make sure that people understand what that truly means, because we've been pushed into this space where corporations have all the power in the state.
Yep, that's right. Yep.
Paulette, I want to ask you specifically about that. If you're elected this year, what do you want to do in the state of Idaho to prevent corporations from not only influencing politics in the state, but spending such enormous amounts of money on our elections?
Well, that's why I'm running my campaign in this very clean way, where we're not taking any corporate PAC money, we're not taking any interest money. We're ensuring that the people own this campaign, and they are the only ones who have any ability to have a say here. And once I'm governor, I will prove that over 20,000 people who contributed to this campaign, they will have a seat at the table.
That's great.
So
go ahead, Summer.
So Paulette, I mean, just as somebody who's running too on a progressive platform, I know that progressive candidates have seen just a lot of vitriol and negative attacks. How has your opponent been running, and how have you been handling just that sort of negative atmosphere in politics right now?
They want to ensure that people, have all this the smoke and mirrors in their face, and that's the challenge. Is you got to be above and beyond that, and people are starting to see clear as a day as far as who I am and who my opposition is. But as long as we keep people focused on the issues, we'll make sure that we see success come November 6th. And in fact, we're already seeing that now. So I think this is why we have seen unprecedented numbers of people registering to vote and voting early.
You know, the New York Times recently said that this country has crossed the threshold of fascism, that we are truly in a very, very dangerous time. And I think that this particular election, if we do not ensure that we have progressive candidates in office after November 6th, that fascism will continue to spread and grow. We're already seeing it with freedom of the press, with, Trump throwing people out of the White House press conferences. We're seeing it with freedom of assembly, with them trying to stop protesters like Bob, myself, and others here from being able to assemble around the White House and other areas. How do you feel about that?
Well, I'm here to defend the dignity of the press. And that's what I represent and stand for. And in everything that I do, I will make sure that I continue to uphold that message, because we have to defend our media. And if we're not, then we're only suppressing the people because they serve a purpose. However, there's other challenges, and I see what our president is doing. So this is why we have to continue fighting back with our vote. I remember people at home that their vote matters. This is not an electoral college vote. This is a popular vote. So every single vote makes a tremendous difference, and all the way down ticket, because we have some strong progressives here in Idaho who deserve their vote. They've been working hard all across the state, and they too want to bring transparency to our government.
I'm sorry to cut you, but you're good. You look like you're a strong organizer, so make sure I tell everyone that we talk to, knocking on those doors, being there in person. No volunteer can do what you can do. Thank you so very much for being with us. Next, the wrap. Matt does the numbers and another October surprise. Let's wrap this up. What do you all think? Lisa Ring, Paulette Jordan, how are they going to do? I mean, I don't know, Matt. I don't know, y'all.
I liked Paulette's talking points around this transcending just divisive party politics and this being about governor for everyone. I would love to see someone like her representing Idaho. I just don't know if the numbers are going to work.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. I'm still worried about Lisa and the correction. The correction officer
she wasn't
question,
able to really give us an answer.
Yeah, and it's an important issue right now.
It is.
For,
I mean,
for
she's
Black
in
folks,
Georgia.
for people of color in Georgia.
That's right. And by the way, like my son is in Georgia, so I'm actually very, very concerned. My family members are
Has he
there.
voted yet?
He has. Well, he votes in New York.
Okay,
So,
got it.
yeah.
No, I will say I appreciate her conversation about the need, not the need to move beyond party labels, but the need to explain what those party labels mean.
Absolutely.
And I think that's really important for Democrats across the country, is to talk about why it's good to be a Democrat. It's good to be a progressive, and we have issues and we have values that a majority of Americans support, and so why not talk about that proudly?
Yeah, but when we asked, I'm so happy that she brought up fascism, because I was certainly about to ask her. And I think when you talk about the titles and trying to sort of push them to the side, right now may not be the time to do that, Matt. People need to be clear that if we do not ensure that there is a democratic controlled government in this country, fascism will be the law of the land, because that's where we are at this point.
Because there's no real resistance in the Republican Party anymore.
No,
at the beginning of the administration, it was unclear, but now we know that they completely supported
which makes them, it makes them complicit in this.
Oh, it makes them complicit, and we have a chance as Democrats this year to take their seats. I mean, Jeff Flake is the perfect example in Arizona. We have the chance in just over a week to elect a woman to take Jeff Flake's seat who can actually be a Democrat in the Senate and stand up and not only make the argument in Twitter, but actually go out there and support democratic progressive policies.
Yeah, and we're not trying to go to anything that looks like Hitler or any of these people, Mussolini.
This is not both sides.
Exactly. This is not, we're not doing that.
That's not where we are anymore.
Doing that, no.
This is not, well, on their side they have this, and on this side, no. It's clear and stark.
That's right.
If the Republicans prevail, we are in trouble.
Absolutely.
We're already in trouble. We have seen throughout history what happens, when fascism rises up. We have to fight back against it.
And before, at least, we had the courts, but now with the Supreme Court completely in jeopardy, I know they're bringing Pence's Roe v. Wade law up to review, and this is so fast. It's only been a couple weeks since we were fighting the Kavanaugh nomination.
Absolutely.
So we have 11 days left. What should we at home be doing
I mean,
to
scaring
make
people
sure
to death
that Democrats not only
vote,
vote, but elect Democrats?
Scaring people to vote, not to death.
Getting
to vote.
leftist, progressive voters out. I personally don't think we can. We have to do more than just focus on what Trump offers. We have to talk about what we offer. What does the Democratic Party have to offer? What are our values? We have to push that. We have 11 days.
Well, and to speak to that, like calling people up and trying to threaten them with this whole idea of like if you don't vote, then that's not it. You got to organize. You have to organize. You got to knock on doors, tell them who the candidate is that you think they need to be voting for, and then get them to the polls. This is not the moment for thinking that we can try to make these like moral arguments to try to shame people into voting. I know we say scare people, but really it does not work. In fact, with people who are in really marginalized communities, when you come to them and start that, it turns them off.
Yeah, to vote cynicism.
The other way.
Absolutely.
They want you to give them, speak to me like I'm intelligent. Don't talk to me like I'm a victim who's stupid. You know?
That's right.
Yeah. So.
No, and I think too, there are a lot of easy ways this year. It's the 21st century now. We have technology. There are a lot of easy ways for progressive activists to get involved. Whether it's knocking on doors, whether it's making phone calls, whether it's sending postcards, text messages.
Do it all.
There are tools online.
We have to do everything. We have to do it all at the same time.
Don't think about it. Be about it. For sure. Listen, it's a good show. Just a great show tonight, really. But time's up, and that is something that Republicans need to hear in a few weeks. The time's up. Till next week with more news, more candidates, and the latest predictions. For Bob, Matt, and Summer, I'm Tamika Mallory. Good night, America, and thank you.